Welcome to the One-on-One Podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
Welcome back to another episode of the One-on-One Podcast. I'm your host, as always. Make sure to follow the show on social media at the One-on-One Podcast on pretty much all social media platforms, www.tjojp.com. Make sure to check out the Occultus Mundi, Homunculus Owner's Manual, all that good stuff on there. If you're on the RSS feed, come check out the YouTube, and vice versa. If you're on YouTube, come check out the RSS feed. And joining us today, we have Ike Baker. Very excited for this conversation. What's up, Ike? How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. Thanks very much. I've heard about your podcast for a really long time now, and we've got a couple of mutual friends, so it's good to finally meet you.
Yeah, I've seen you around. When I had reached out to the publisher because I actually wanted to interview, I think his name is Kevin Kline, I think is his name, but he doesn't really have any information. He published the John Dee journals, the whole compendium of all the magical journals. And she's like, hey, I'll reach out to him, but have you had Ike on? And I know I'd seen you on other shows before. Pretty sure there's been a couple. You've been on Mark's show, right? My family thinks I'm crazy, and probably some other people too.
Yeah, a few times.
Paranoid American, all those people.
Sky.
Yeah, Sky.
From Philosophical Mind stuff.
Yeah, shout out to him. And so, Ike, we're going to be talking about some of your newest work here, and I just want to pick your brain because you are a ceremonialist, right? You're a practicing occultist. You write about the occult, the esoteric. But before we get into that, where can people find you? Because you also have a podcast. Where can they go check that out, and where can they find your books?
Yeah, thanks. So the podcast is Arcanum. You can see it here on the bottom right or left corner of my screen. It's ARCANVM. That's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. I've got everything pretty much on my website. It's ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER. You've got probably 3 or 4 episodes. The newest episodes of my podcast are available there. My blog, links to buy the book. Also, I do part of Arcanum is not just a podcast. I do documentary style presentations on the history, theory, and practice of esotericism. And so you've got some videos up there that you can watch some of the documentary stuff. Check out some of the trips, the excursions, and also conferences that I've organized. They're all up there too. So ikebaker.com, you can get a nice cross section of everything that I do. And there should be a little sort of text box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You can click on that and write me anything. That goes directly to my personal email. So if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, please feel free. I try to make myself as available as possible to interested parties within reason.
Yeah, within reason, right?
Yeah, it can spiral out pretty quickly. So
sure, you got a lot of interesting people hitting you up. I mean, I get all kinds of sort of weird emails, and do you get the cryptic messages sometimes of like these people who are, you're almost there but not quite, like, you know, like, you ever get those people?
I get grumpy messages. A lot of times it's from people who are big fans of Aleister Crowley, because I'm not. And so I call that a bad case of thelemitis. That's really, yeah. So, but yeah, I do get, I get some strange stuff, but there's wonderful, wonderful people out there, truly. And I appreciate every second that they offer me. If not in asking questions, and I learn stuff from people all the time, you know?
Right on. And Ike, tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you started in this whole esoteric and occult realm of things, and what gave you the final push to actually become a ceremonial magician, and start actually doing you're an actual magician. I'm an armchair occultist. So we're here talking because I study this stuff all the time and I talk about it, but I've done one or two things, but nothing too crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we need both in this world, so that's good. And I'm happy to be in dialogue. That's kind of where I find myself. I am in dialogue with, the occult enthusiasts, the occult researchers, practitioners, non-practitioners, and academics. I work a lot in academia. Tons of stuff coming up this year, but also last year. So that I feel privileged to be able to have this kind of omnidirectional conversation going with everybody at the table. Now, I've told this story before on other podcasts, but for your audience, I'll tell it again. I had studied, Kabbalah, astrology, alchemy. I was very interested in how cryptic alchemy was as a kid. Started studying this stuff probably when I was like 18. 2004, 2003 era. But the thing is that what was available to a kid like me in the Long Island suburbs in New York was kind of like this Dan Brown occultism, and so that's really what I based a lot of my study on, internet research and stuff like that. I wasn't familiar with that world just yet. So at around 19 or 20, I remember my aunt had a tenant, and this lady was very nice and she was very quiet, but she threw herself in front of a train. And my aunt called me over and she said, "Hey, it turns out that this lady was a hoarder and I need help emptying the apartment." And so there were stacks of books like you'd see in like a TV show with, pathways, and a lot of the books, journals, stuff still wrapped in the cellophane. So we're hauling this stuff out. And this one book cover just grabs my attention. And I pull it out, and the title was, I got it right here on my bookshelf. I still have it.
The book.
The Oracle of Kabbalah by Richard Seidman. And so I flipped through this thing. I read it in a day walking around my neighborhood. I wouldn't say that I was any more educated on Kabbalah than from my previous studies, but something struck me and said, this is important. So I went on the yellow or white pages or something like that when people used to use that on the internet, and I typed in Long Island Kabbalah Study Group. So a gentleman's name and information came up. I emailed him. I said, "Hey, I'm really interested in the Kabbalah Study Group." And he said, "Well, that thing doesn't meet anymore, but there's this other thing." And the other thing was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I started having this back and forth interviewing courtship period. I was also a musician. And so I spent a lot of my time out on the road playing shows. And it was really a crossroad moment for me because I met these people and I wasn't sure what the heck magic was. Like, what do they think they're doing? Like Harry Potter wand waving? So this seems insane. So I decided to go back out on tour, and I flaked out. I really was like a typical millennial flake for that age. No call, no show to my first initiation. And as life would have it, maybe 7 or so years later, my life completely fell apart. I had a really what we might call a tower card experience. Just the whole sandcastle got kicked down by Providence, I guess. And as devastating as that was, I really, for something in my gut, told me to reach back out. And I did. And I said, "Look, I'm really sorry, but I feel like this is my calling. Otherwise, I wouldn't come back here hat in hand like this. And I don't even know why." So they ended up reinitiating me and or really recording me, re-interviewing me, and then finally initiating me. And the rest is history. I've been in the order now for just about a decade, and I run the Asheville Temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm the imperator of that temple and an administrator and a senior adept. So that's how I got started, really. Very interesting. It was almost like a tractor beam situation. I wasn't sure what I was headed towards, but it put me in a really good position because I didn't have a head full of stuff that I was constantly projecting onto what this needs to be or what this should be, and trying to shoehorn it into this neat little box that fit my preconceptions and expectations. My, unfamiliarity with it allowed the system to reveal itself to me and show me what it was, instead of me kind of constantly jumping the gun. So I'm lucky, I think.
The way I got involved with the occult and occultism, esoteric, and all this other stuff, it was my religious upbringing, because I was always told to stay away from it, right? Do you think maybe that lady, did she have any other occult books? Did the occult push her to the brink of doing what she did?
Well, she was Jewish, so I think that explains the Kabbalah book. Because there were a few other Kabbalah books, like she might have had like a version of Matt's Zohar, one of the editions or volumes, but I didn't see anything else at the time that was like astrological or alchemical. But I mean, we're talking a long time ago. It could have been the case.
Yeah, because that's something like I've been told, don't read the Book of Enoch. It's going to possess you. And the latest one I heard was, I was like, why is the Old Testament so different than the New Testament? And they were like, just disregard the Old Testament completely. I was like, what? Yeah, that's the canon. Like, what do you mean? So I always had this shroud over it. And I'm a musician. I played a lot of years guitar in church. So I've seen miracles. I've experienced the Holy Spirit. I've seen supernatural things. Right? So I know that there's something there. My question to you is, again, a very elementary question, but I always like to get the perspective of actual people who dabble into it. What is magic? Is it real? Is it make-believe? Because I'm in the middle. I think that there are some real aspects to it, and the more I look into it, a lot of the occultists, and I'll use the example, one of the latest ones, Johann Weyer, that wrote the Pseudo-Monarchium, that kind of did it in a satirical way, right? And then before that, you had Count of Gabalius, where his work was supposed to be making fun of like the occult of the time, but then Manly P. Hall and Blavatsky took it, and all these other prominent occultists took the work and took it serious. So where do we stand? I mean, those are more recent examples, but what is magic? Is it a system? Is it a force? Like, what exactly is it to you, at least?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. That was my first really, several years ago when I decided, hey, you know what, I'm going to throw my hat into the ring and start talking about this stuff, because of how really crazy everything seemed on the internet, with, young kids doing sort of goetic demonic evocation, massive Reddit threads. I'm like, this is not healthy, I don't think, because here's the crux of the matter. If magic is real, now there are certain forces at play that I personally believe we are looking at from a perspective that obscures what it is. It'd be like, well, I know that's a guy. I know that this is a person sitting in front of me, but I only see the back of their head. You don't really get a good sense of, the defining features of the face, the voice, the mannerisms, that kind of thing. And a lot of us are looking at it from this perspective because it's essentially the forefront of consciousness, consciousness experiments. And I'm not talking about necessarily that whole Rhonda Byrne, The Secret sort of thing. That kind of stuff really rubs me the wrong way. I think there's a lot of damage done to things like magic by way of the New Age and stuff that came out of, post-Blavatskyan and some Blavatskyan theosophy. But it is predicated on this idea that the operator is a universe in miniature. And what does that mean? Well, it basically means if you look at the universe has to be, from a certain vantage point, taken as a whole. We don't know if it's finite or infinite, definitely. Most people think it is to some degree finite, but all the multiplicity, the different solar systems, different galaxies, the black holes, life known and unknown, all of that multiplicity is contained within that sort of, monadic structure of this is a universe. It is a whole with many moving parts. And we, just like anything else, really, we are tiny organisms within the greater whole, but that relationship is mirrored. We are a single unit, a universe with many moving parts and many constituent organisms. And so there is a relationship there, a reciprocity that allows magicians to call forth certain aspects, right? I don't have a planet in me. I don't have Mars inside of me, but I'll tell you, I have anger and I have aggression and I have energy and I have courage, and that Mars within, this seems very psychological, that Mars within can be roused, can be brought to the forefront of my my miniature universe, my microcosm. We have a term for it in Western ceremonial. It's called the sphere of sensation. So it's the outer boundary of the aura, inclusive of everything else: your body, your energy meridians, your thoughts, your emotions, your psyche. All of that is inclusive in your tiny microcosmic universe. And so we select in magic. It's very specific. It's not mysticism. We don't open up and let whatever, or mediumism, I should say, and just kind of haphazardly summon things or allow things to enter into us, because we're at a severe disadvantage when operating with things on the quote unquote other side of the veil. There's no guarantee they're going to show us a true form. So we do the best that we can in being hyper selective and hyper specific in that selection. And so we use things like color and sound and names and words and scents, right? Incense and things like that, to rouse this quality, this specific force within our microcosm. And then to the degree that we're able to raise that one particular, let's call it vibration or mode of thought, mode of being, to the forefront of the universe, we can then call the corresponding forces in the exterior universe, almost like a vacuum. Like a whirlpool, gaining what David Rankine has called magical momentum. And that's a big part of it. And you've got some people on one side of the fence that say, hey, well, I'm a Goetic or I'm a Solomonic magician, and you're a Golden Dawn, and I even work theurgy out of the Chaldean oracles and reconstructed stuff from the PGM, and they're very quick to say, well, but we summon spirits. It's not us consecrating something, consecrating a talisman. It's the spirit consecrating it. And the thing is, all of these disembodied intelligences have an objective reality, but you access them. Our access points are all within here. It's all within our the psyche. And those entities, those spirits, they don't have a physical body. I can't ask them to take me to the DMV in a car the way I could, to have my fiance or my friend drive me to the gym or something like that. They can't do that. Why? Because they don't have solidified physical forms. They are an intelligent energy. And so at the end of the day, your consciousness is making contact. The part of you that is transcendent of the physical, your sort of, signal, your intelligent energy, which is located for the time being in your body and wherever you are in the world, is making contact with those disembodied intelligent energies and interacting with them. And so really we're at the forefront of consciousness here. We have put something that is very, very large into an extremely small box for a very long time. And I think some of that is somewhat intentional from the powers that have been, that are now and have been for centuries.
Is it an aspect of the occult? And I was reading a book by a pupil of Eugene Consalia, which was a pupil of Falconelli, right? The infamous Falconelli. Mm-hmm. And there was something, I forget the name of the book. there was something in the book he said where when you're looking at this thing, the occult or any of these topics, that it will quite literally morph in front of you, and it's in an almost elusive fashion. And I've experienced that myself, where sometimes you think you've got it, you're hitting the nail on the head, and then when you go to strike again, the nail's moved, a foot that way, and you go, wait a minute, it just clicked for me. It made perfect sense. And do you think that that since the occult and all this stuff is more readily available to people, now you're talking about Reddit, which I'm sure there's a bunch of crazy stuff on Reddit, right? The stuff that you read on there. Do you think that is an aspect of the occult, that it's always kind of sort of changing and morphing? And are there characters at play who muddy the waters on purpose in order to kind of move people away from the truth with a capital T or the source or something? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that the more in line, the more firmly centered in the path I am, the more is I would say demonstrable, empirical, and agrees with the insights of many other adepti over vast centuries. For instance, I'll give you this example. I didn't start out as an academic occultist. I just wanted to do the practice. Okay. And that's kind of the temple culture I came up in when I was being trained in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The temple culture was, if it works, use it, do it, do it safely, but do it. So I remember the first time that I had an encounter with really an entity. And that encounter took place in a visualization exercise. And for many, many years, I couldn't figure it out. And I had these experiences repeatedly, but the first time was the most jarring, existentially startling. When you can watch something that you thought was being projected or generated or emanated by your own imagination take on completely a life of its own. And with a species of autonomy and a level of vitality, life in its eyes, in its expression, it completely dominates the scene. You have no idea what it's going to say next, what it's going to do next. How did this happen? And you're thinking to yourself, I am not thinking this. So fast forward, I have these, and you learn how to do that stuff safely and control it. And you bounce ideas off of people when you're in an order, right? And thoughts. That's the great part about it, is there's a support system. You can talk to each other about, have you had an experience like this? And sure enough, most people have. So fast forward to several years later, and I decide to get more academic, and I'm reading the works of the Neoplatonists of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century CE. Okay, we're talking almost 2,000 years ago. And in this one particular book, De Anima, on the soul, written by the Neoplatonic philosopher Iamblichus of Chalkis, he was like for anybody that knows theurgy, the idea of theurgy, ritualized spiritual ascent. He's the godfather of it for all intents and purposes on the historical record. So what he writes is the mind and attention follow what happens, but essentially they are not seized by divine inspiration. Only the fantasia, the imaginal faculty, has the capacity to be seized by the god or the entity, right? The angel, angelos, the messenger, and moved. But the mind and attention follow what happens. So he's describing almost 2,000 years before. I had no idea who. I probably had this experience 100 times before I knew who Iamblichus was. And he's saying exactly what I experienced. This autonomy that happens in the imagination. And the only way I'd be able to say I am not thinking this is because my mind and attention was following the fantasia, the images that I had generated but had been seized by something other than myself. Because that is the level where we all coexist. Us, the gods, the angels, the demons, it's all on the astral. And we are the most poised to create change here. So now if you want to create change on Earth, you'd better get in touch with a human. That's your best. You'd better hijack, co-opt, whatever it is. Find a human to do your will. That's the dangerous part about magic. So the thing is, for me, it doesn't really morph because I've been in it. And the key component of being able to have insight, and I talk about this in the preface to my book, A Formless Fire, that came out last year. A lot of people think insight is like the accumulation of stuff. I got to think about it and analyze and look. Insight at this level that we're talking about is the removal of stuff, the removal of, ideation of on certain things and analysis. It's being able to see clearly what is, and not have this, let's call it cognitive dissonance. The only reason cognitive dissonance is a thing is because we have been trained that this stuff can't and shouldn't happen, shouldn't be able to happen. And so, that's going to create cognitive dissonance. But the role of an adept and initiated magician is to hold the opposites in balance and not let one overtake. So my subjective and my objective realities have to do this dance. And it's okay that there's not a resolution. I'm the resolution. I'm the mediator between the two. Again, it's another reason why magic can be tricky, because you've got to have a really firm grasp on reality and know how and when and for how long to let yourself go into these more subjective realms, and how much space to give those things in your life. Now, the thing that really gives the insight is practice. Practice. When I've been doing this stuff for 20 years, and I still read and I research, and it's almost like this strange thing. It's like I feel like I'm unraveling a mystery when I'm researching, and I'm getting closer and closer and closer. And what happens is it's a tension that never resolves, because what I'm trying to learn has to be experienced. It can't be written or talked about. You can write and tell you about how to get to the experience, but we can't write anything about the experience itself.
I love that, because it is that, right? How you're saying it's phenomenological in nature, right? Because when someone was abducted by aliens, it was real to them, whether you believe it or not, and they're the ones that experienced it. And it's like, I've always used the example of when you look at your firstborn son for the very first time and you feel that love, that just crazy feeling that you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. I can't describe that to anybody unless they felt it themselves, right? It's an experience that it's a phenomenon that needs to be experienced, and it can't be described. And that's something that I struggle with when, researching all of this. A lot of the times I ask myself, like, what is all this for? And does it all matter? And where does it resolve, how you're saying? And it's going to eventually get to a point where it's like, you can read all about it all you want, but you're going to have to, pun intended, cross the abyss and pass on to the next side to actually experience what it is that we're reading about. Because that is part of it. And it makes a lot of sense too, that you would need to be training and practicing, and after you're initiated, to hone in on that skill. And I was going to ask you a few questions. So you said earlier, it's sort of in your head, your consciousness is contacting these things. We know that we don't understand consciousness, from a human perspective. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it means. It's just there. Is it the human experience? Like, what is it? And I know you don't like Crowley, but was Crowley onto something when he said it's all, he said the Goetia was sort of in your head and it was different parts of your brain. Was he kind of sort of hinting at that it's all in your head? Or was he trying to lead people astray?
I have found that I don't think Crowley believed it was all psychological. I think that Crowley often, and I'm not one of these people who doesn't like Crowley because of some one-off thing. I've read most of his works, his poetries, the equinoxes, I
hate Crowley, dude. It's okay.
All that stuff. Yeah. I grew to hate him. I didn't hate him when I started out, and I realized that this guy's a great example of that. He doesn't understand what he believes. because he would oscillate so much. He was so obsessed with this idea of, he was like this devout lover who relinquished himself and sacrificed everything for the attainment of samadhi and his higher genius, or as he called it, the holy guardian angel. And then he'd go spend a week in a brothel. And he called that balance. My friend, that's not balance. That's extremes. He was an extreme person. And I believe he had extreme highs, extreme lows. There were times where he was sure of something, and he's a really good example of what not to do when working these initiatic trajectories, because I know he came from a system that said, we're not right hand or left hand. We are middle path. We're middle path magicians. So there's got to be that dynamic equilibrium, right? Where instead of going like this across the tree of life, from severity to mercy, and spending a millisecond crossing the center, we have to find a dynamic equilibrium and work our way up the middle pillar. And that's the path of mildness, really. And that is the point of balanced power. And he was not that kind of initiate. And as a matter of fact, he actually, all of the adepti of the temple of which he was a part in London refused his admission to the inner order. And so, he's not that type of guy. But I do think that at some points he believed it was psychological, and then he had experiences that showed him that it wasn't just psychological. And that's a definitive moment for every magician, when you get to see if you actually believed in this all along. It's like, whoa, that happened, and some people run away screaming. But I think that, yes, there are access points in our microcosm. Jung, the best way to think of it is in a Jungian context, because he said, okay, we have a subconscious and then we have an unconscious. And our individual unconscious is actually a doorway to the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is the realm of the archetypes. And so we have access points in our microcosm to things that have an objective reality. They have an existence of their own. I would say that this theory is probably the most popular among magicians throughout history. I would say serious occultists today, practiced, experienced occultists, know that there is no accounting for this stuff in any totally psychological model. It defies belief, probability, what have you. And then on the other hand, you do have to dig deep into your own psychology in order to work any of this stuff. Otherwise, those things on the other side will just be using you like a puppet.
Speaking of being used by puppets and a connection with Jung too, I was going to ask you what your thoughts on Jung were, because he was one of those ones that really took the dive from an academic perspective sort of thing and mixing the occult in with that. And one of my favorite concepts, right, we have the active imagination, and there was another guy, Henry Corbin, I believe it was, who talked about the mundus imaginalis, right? And you're talking about these things on the other side playing you like a fiddle. And you had John D. and Edward Kelly kind of experiencing that too, where they were using their system to contact these entities that at the end of the day were like, hey, you want to learn the secrets of the universe, boys? You got to swap your wives. Like, what?
Swap wives, right?
Whoa. So the mundus imaginalis has been a concept that's really intrigued me for a long time, where the way to describe it is where it's this middle realm, right? And it's an autonomous realm between the real and the unreal. And it gushes forth from your consciousness, and these things come forth. And, people say that that's where angels come from and all these different things. Would you say that active imagination is a crucial thing in the occult and any practice? Because you're saying about visualizing things.
Yeah, I'll say this. It's because it's a very good question, because it gets to the heart of something here that other questions on this line of reasoning are too vague to address. Active imagination is extremely important. if you're going to have a hard time as a magician if you can't visualize things and hold them there. And not only visualize them with your eyes closed, but visualize them with your eyes open. Now, that active imaginal realm, I wouldn't say that's where angels come from. I wouldn't say that's where demons come from. I wouldn't say that's where gods come from. I'd say that's where the forms that they use to communicate with us come from. They come from that in-between realm that burgeons forth from the mind, and like a hand slipping into a glove, but the glove's got to fit. It can't be something completely inharmonious with their essential nature. They don't work like we do. They don't have free will. We have free will. That's why I can, be fat one day, skinny the next day, and it's, there's like a logical sequence in between the two. These things don't really have a species of free will to the degree that human beings do. That's why it's extremely unique to be a human being. But they will communicate with us given that we formulate the right glove, so to speak, the right form. And that's a big part of Golden Dawn and other forms of Kabbalistic magic, is the assumption of God forms and the creation of what we call talismanic images. And it's exactly that kind of what we call in the Greek tradition empsychosis, the ensoulment of that image. That is what I experienced in the Fantasia. And as Henri Corbin called it, also he coined this phrase, or at least popularized it, the imaginal faculty, instead of calling it imagination, because that has like this stigma to it where it's like, it doesn't mean anything, it's not real. Well, he was translating, I think Persian and Arabic texts, Islamic texts. It was like, I have to find a different word to use, because they're saying what was translated into English as imagination, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So he's talking about the active capacity to generate images. That is a power of the soul. That is what we in magic, that is one of the magical tools of a human being, the part of your soul that can imagine something without any prompting, nothing there. That's how buildings get built, cities get built, strategies get formulated. All sorts of wonderful things come from this realm, and still people, like to think of it as that it's junk, it's nothing.
Yeah, Henry Corbin was studying Sufism and the swirling dervishes and all that, which is super, super interesting. And just want to remind everyone, make sure to check out the show on Patreon, patreon.com/The One-on-One Podcast. I constantly get emails, only one episode a week. Yeah, one episode a week for the public, but for as little as $5 a month, you can get up to 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 1 episode per day on the Patreon, as well as on the YouTube channel as a member for as little as $5. And there's also on the Patreon over 250 episodes only found on there. There's an extensive backlog of episodes. So check that out. For those interested, for those asking, make sure to follow the show on YouTube, One-on-One Podcast. Also, One-on-One Media. I am going live every Tuesday on there streaming. I also go live on twitch.tv/One-on-One Podcast. So make sure to check me out on there Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern. And make sure to get your copy of the Occultus Mundi Homunculus Owner's Manual, all that good stuff at tjojp.com. Can pick up your copies there, or go over to the Ko-Fi. I'm on Facebook, Twitch, Kick, Rumble, all that good stuff. You know where to find it, and enjoy this episode. The concept of active imagination, I've done it myself. I believe that writing is a powerful tool, and that's why Jung, the Red Book, Black Book, and all these things. I think that writing, the way I've come to understand it, not only is writing sacred, because if you really think about it, any magical tradition, any religious text, any religion, I've always said, is held together by writing. And it's writing that shifts the paradigm of reality, quite literally. And it has shaped our world as we know it. Any major world religion, really. I mean, it comes down to an old book that was translated and passed down. And I think that's why stories are so important as well in our reality, because they do this. They kind of serve as a as a crutch, in my opinion, to the active imagination, because now they're taking away and they're kind of leading you astray from having to do the active imagination by just putting pictures in front of you, and that's the substitute for that, right? So they're kind of deconditioning you from the original, which was oral tradition, which was, creating mind palaces and the art of memory, which, I've always tried to understand the art of memory for such a long time. And I, this concept that, who is it that Yates, that she writes about,
Frances Yates.
Yates. And it eludes me because I'm like trying to read her works and I'm trying to dig in and like really buckle down. And I'm like, what? Frances, tell me the answer to the memory. Like, what is it? And it's like this concept that maybe memory itself is a power that you're able to use to, how you're saying, maybe tap into this source or energy, or, I still don't know.
I mean, here's the thing that happens when you become an initiate, and Crowley said this to his own chagrin. He's like, I was threatened on all pains of death, not to reveal any of the secrets, and then safely entrusted with the Hebrew alphabet. Well, the thing that we're doing in things like the Golden Dawn with the Hebrew alphabet, the signs and symbols of alchemy, of astrology, we are building a symbolic vocabulary. Because what happens, right? Okay, so here's the thing. You get active imagination, but at some point that active imagination becomes receptive. And what it's receptive to is the power that you're invoking if you're a magician. You want something to come into the image you have made. So you've made it amenable to its, what we would consider to be its harmonies, its correspondences. It's kind of the same thing where it's like, hey, if you put a drum kit in a room and, a bowl of pasta and meatballs, I'm going to be very likely to be in that room. Whereas if you put things that aren't harmonious to my nature, I'm not going to come in there. So it's kind of a similar. It's a very gross exaggeration, but being facetious to kind of make a point here. So what we do is imagine, let's say you're doing a path working, where you're using here this diagram, the tree of life behind me, and you're working the paths in visualization. Now, some of that is active. You got to know the correspondences. But then there's always this moment, and you prepare for that moment. And so now I meet an entity, and the entity tells me, or it does, I don't know, I'm going to have to see. And this is an elementary way. Pathworking is an elementary way to build this skill of going active, passive in the imagination. Now, what would happen if all of a sudden Big Bird showed up? Because that's what's in your available imagery. That's what's in your lexicon. Well, it'd be very difficult to interpret this stuff. Why? Because that's not a universal symbol. That is a subjective symbol. That is a personal symbol that means something to you. If you know anything about, the difference between archetypal and sort of dream imagery. So what we're doing in a system like the Golden Dawn is we're training into ourselves a symbolic vocabulary. And that's why all these things have all these correspondences and these meanings, so that if I see the letter Aleph, I'm thinking spirit. I'm thinking the head of the Akh. I'm thinking the breath of God. If I think the Hebrew letter Vav, I'm thinking of some kind of nail. I'm thinking of some kind of phallic interpretation, obviously in a divine sense, in an elevated sense. So we have all these things that allow us to interpret these experiences and make these things more fluid for us. You're 100% right about words and letters. This is a very ancient philosophy, the magical philosophy of language. Not only is it the written word, it's the spoken word. Why? Because this is the same way the ancients conceived of the creator God, the demiurge, whatever you want to call it. It created in the same way. So they had two terms, nous and logos. Okay, logos is the order. It's the pattern. It's the universal laws that are indicative of harmony and therefore some sort of grand intelligence. On the other hand, nous is the intelligence itself. It's the mind of God. And I mean, you could think of it as like that which generates the Platonic forms, if you're familiar with those things, or if you're into Neoplatonism, it's the second hypostatic postulate of nous. It's just mind. So logos, which really in Greek means word, logos, that order, is to nous, the mind of God, as speech is to the human mind. Why? Because it reveals things unseen. You cannot see my thoughts, but you will know them when I speak them. And that will give you some sort of indication of my character, something. It will give you something about my nature just from hearing the things that I say. And it's the same way that we approach the investigation of the divine and the cosmos. We look at the order, the logos, the speech of God, right? In most accounts, either Brahma utters the divine Om, or, Yahweh says, let there be light. He doesn't fashion a light bulb. God said, let there be light. Because it's the order is indicative of the thought, the same way my speech and your speech is indicative of the contents of our mind. So there's something very, very interesting and magical here, and this circles all the way back. And I'll close this on this point. This circles back to what I was saying before, with individuals as a small universe, as tiny sort of co-collaborators in this grand dance. We're almost like a mirrored reflection, but attenuated. We're not God, but we have similar capacities given our size and station.
You mentioned earlier about these Reddit occultists that usually when people dive into the occult, the first thing they want to do is the hardest hitting stuff. They want to conjure up demons to physical manifestation or whatever it is that they're trying to do, right? They want to go balls to the wall right off the bat. And you said that that's not healthy, right? In a sort of way. Are there only certain people who can interact with this? Similar to how, like a shaman class or priest class. And right, we've been talking about the mundus imaginalis or active imagination, this concept. And some people can't visualize within their head. Some people don't have an inner monologue. Would that play a role as to maybe you not being able to interact with it? Does that play into the aspect of, hey, I tried this, nothing happened, maybe I don't believe enough? Where does that come in?
So I would say, I'll start off by saying this. I have seen it most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when people want to jump in and do all the crazy stuff first, it's because, again, like I said earlier, they're testing their own belief. They don't, I say it all the time. I hear magicians that have written books, that have been on the internet saying, oh, well, the dangers in magic are negligible. I don't know. Do you believe in any of this stuff? Because there are real and significant dangers to things like this, most of which are psychosis and delusion. So I'm not even just talking about, what if you call something that you can't get to go away? What if you do something successful? I would say probably 60% of all magic that is done by magicians, and this is a gross exaggeration and probably too much of an overestimate, but I would say in my experience that like 60% of the magic that most people are doing, because they don't understand what magic is just psychology. And it's not, it's not necessarily actual magic. Now I would say, once that kind of, there are a couple of people that either something happens, let's say they have a natural talent, or whatever, they accidentally, providentially did something without realizing it on a perfect astrological election, right? The astrology, we use it like the tides. If I want to get to that island, I've got to go when the tide is going out. not coming in and working against me. So a lot of that's really why magicians pay attention to astrology, because there's a lot of that etheric kind of tide thing that we're working with. Now, maybe a beginner just so happened to be floating when the tide was out and it worked. Now, there are two types of people. There are people who are going to get scared and leave it alone, or there are people who are going to say, okay, I like this, I'm going to keep doing it some more. And I would say people that have aphantasia, it's called, they don't have the ability to visualize. There are other ways. You can develop other senses. I've worked with people who thought they had aphantasia and can now visualize, because it's like I spent a lot of time explaining to them and working with them about what visualization is. They just couldn't figure out what was going on. Am I supposed to be seeing something? No, not when you're visualizing. When you're visualizing, I mean, you are imagining something in your head. Now, for the purposes of magic, you have to open your eyes, and that should be automatically, after a while of practice, it should be in the room with you, but not 3-dimensionally, 2-dimensionally, but it's there as an overlay. And what is that? It's combining the hemispheres. The same way that I would go lucid in a dream, right? I take my waking mind into my unconscious, to my subconscious. You're doing that in magic. You're bringing the subconscious, you're bringing the intuitive, the imaginal into your waking consciousness. So it's the inverse of like lucid dreaming, really, is what you're doing. And so you teach people to do that. And if they can't do it, there are other ways. But the main thing is this. People shouldn't, and this is a truism from very, very old. It's just now in the modern times of this kind of, democratization of everything, because we have the internet and we don't know what it means to have any kind of self-control or blockages from seeing things, doing things. I mean, everything's free. You can watch somebody get beheaded on the internet. You could watch people having sex, and whatever you want, you can see and do in our world. And so these kinds of things that I'm about to say, even though for most of human history were just obvious to everybody, we've kind of thrown them by the wayside. And that is that you shouldn't do magic until you're prepared to do magic. And what is that preparation? Initiation. So you get a lot of people who go into magic and they never initiate. An initiation, if it's true, if it's an actual initiatic order with qualified initiating adepts and a formula that works, you're going to undergo what we call a spiritual alchemy. A lot of people think that's new agey. Well, take a look at Zosimus of Panopolis talking about spiritual and laboratory alchemy, or really it was metallurgy in his day, being just reflections of each other, right? And that's the 3rd, 4th century again. And in Egypt, he was an Egyptian scribe priest. So not new agey, but there is a salve et coagula that should happen to you. Like I said earlier, you have to know your own psychology, or these things will use you. They will play you like a fiddle, and they will use you like a puppet. So you must undergo that alchemical initiation to know yourself better. And not only that, but what we talked about, the microcosm, the miniature universe. Well, the universe as it exists out there, the macrocosm, the big version, that has more divine proportions. What do I mean by that? Well, most things are tempered by their opposite constantly, right? Equal amounts of, in the course of the year, equal amounts of day and night. It's the same thing if you go to like Iceland, where like half the year it's dark, but then also half the year it's light all the time. There's a natural balancing act that happens. In the microcosm, because of nature and nurture and traumas and all sorts of exterior things, we're all out of whack. We don't have that same balance. So what the alchemical initiation is supposed to do is supposed to rebalance you in accordance with the proportions of the universe. You're using nature as your model. That is Hermetism. That is Rosicrucianism. You're reading the book of nature and learning how to find and experience and maintain the dynamic equilibrium of balance. And a lot of that has to do with virtue. A lot of that has to do with what we call, sophrosini in the Greek tradition, temperance, balance, equilibrium. This is knowing thyself, and not just letting yourself off the rails. You're going to an extreme. Things in this realm cannot exist for long if they are extreme. And so the prevailing mode of existence is a dynamic equilibrium along the center of gravity, the middle. And so if you haven't done that, I do not recommend that you do magic. Also, if you have mental health issues, I don't think that is now I'm talking about schizophrenia. I'm talking about, severe dissociative disorders, and maybe even things that are very like severe bipolar disorder. I would recommend for your health, not out of some kind of exclusionary sentiment, but for your health. You are communicating with things you can't see, and you are aggrandizing potentially your ego to cathedral heights. And not only that, but if you're undergoing alchemical initiation, it's actually a species of self-induced schizophrenia. So you don't really want to exacerbate any of these things. So those are the types of people who I think shouldn't do magic.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. You said it's a self-induced psychosis in a sort of way, right? To be able to do these things. And, you mentioned spiritual alchemy. I've heard that Freemasonry eliminated the lab work. You were talking about Zosimos, right? Who talked about that, about how, Henrik, what's his name? Henrik Kunrad.
Heinrich Kunrad.
And the plates that they would enter, right, in the oratory or the laboratory, and like that's what those plates served at. It was their alchemical lab on the other side, and that's what those mandalas essentially was for, and with the perspective and everything, because they would go in and do part of their alchemy within that. You mentioned merging the hemispheres, right? You have the government with HemiSync and their trials on that and their studies on that. And I want to ask you the $1 million question that a lot of people, because I do speak about conspiracies as well, because I think it kind of crosses the occult, right? It's a conspiracy, what we're talking about now. Are you able to do all this? Are there demons? Are there angels? Can you control them? Can you not? Right? Like, people always wonder about that. And are what you would consider the elites using magic subtly or on purpose to control the masses? And if they are the masses even susceptible to a sort of magical manipulation, if you will? Because this is a conspiracy theory that a lot of people talk about, where you have the schizos on the internet collecting, they do the gematria nowadays, which is Kabbalah, right? Which in my opinion is a real practice, just not the way that people are using it nowadays. But what are your thoughts on that, on this elite secret cabal using magic all on us, through Hollywood and the media and social media and all these things?
Yeah, it's a big question. And it's part of it was, this whole thing, what you're talking about now, what you're bringing up is a big reason why in the first place I wanted to study Kabbalah and things like that and see what is going on here. Because something inside of me just knew that some of this stuff was at play. And the thing is, I meet a lot of people, especially in occult orders, they tend to be, well, I'm not going to make any negative or disparaging kind of comments.
This is a safe place. You can say whatever you want, Ike.
Well, the thing is, they tend to be a little diluted and a little hypocritical. And a lot of the times, and a lot of that has to do with not everybody, again, is an initiate. Not everybody has gone through this hard-won balancing act. And it doesn't end. I'll be doing this till I'm dead, and I have to. There's no choice. You can't turn back now. But a lot of people, for some reason, we get together in robes and funny hats and say all these crazy words and vibrate and go around in circles. And we do all that for the purposes of bringing good into the world. How far-fetched is it that there is some group of people doing that somewhere to bring bad into the world? And what is bad? Self-interest. like self-interest that is a runaway train, right? Okay, so vicious self-interest is, for all intents and purposes, the dark force, the dissolutive force in society and in individuals. It's compelling us constantly to use our eros, our spiritual desire, which is the inherent nature of our soul, to ground it in orgasms, food, money, competition, instead of reaching back up like an infant to our creator, and to the higher hierarchies, our brothers and sisters spiritually beyond or above us. I don't want to say a value judgment, but there's a hierarchy here, right? We're talking about logos, order. The universe is ordered. And so are the spiritual realm. And that's a truism of all occultism for as far back as you go. So I don't know anybody that is an elite that practices this stuff. So I want to clarify that. I'm not claiming to have any behind the scenes hidden knowledge, but I know what it's like. I'll say this. I understand and I notice the markers of when someone is under some kind of control, under some kind of spell, some kind of enchantment, some kind of will dominance, for lack of a better term. I've some of my work is in clerical stuff. I've spent 7 years as a deacon and exorcist. So I also know the hallmarks of parasitism, possession, not even full on possession, but attachment of certain entities. And I would say that the overwhelming majority of people are under some kind of influence, one way or another, because what renders us susceptible to that kind of influence is now hardwired, and has been for 100 years almost, hardwired into our society. Substances which weaken the etheric body, disruptions in our natural circadian rhythms, in our natural hormonal sort of output, those rhythms being constantly in fight or flight, lowers immunity. And I'm not even just talking now from the perspective of a magician. I have a college level training in Chinese medicine and acupuncture. So I learned the energetic stuff. I studied with Qigong masters and all that stuff. I got a Reiki practice. And it's just a truism in all forms of traditional energetic medicine, is that you do certain things and your chi, your defenses break down, and it makes it easier for things to enter. I would say most people are into that, or subject to that. And a big part of that is the mass media. The mass media, there has never been a repository of popular opinion in the same way as we have it today, where literally we've got screens in our pockets in every room in the house, multiple ones, and you can tune in, and things and people that you wouldn't let into your living room if they were knocking on your door now have you by the nose, have your attention. And one of the things that preliminarily you learn as an initiate is you must control the gate of your mind. We think we only have a gastronomical or a physical diet. We have a mental diet. And that mental diet gives whatever's coming in direct access to our energy, direct access to our thoughts, feelings, emotions, especially if we have not initiated. What does initiate mean? To begin. If we have not even begun the inward journey, these people are basically like veal, they're like just baby sheep, fawns to wolves. They have no way of even knowing how eviscerated they're getting. I don't know if it's coordinated, but I know what I'm seeing. I definitely know what I'm seeing. Is there a suspicion on my part that a lot of this is coordinated? Absolutely. But I can't, of course somebody's going to go, sources. It's like, and
trust me,
I don't
bro.
have any.
Yeah. Source, trust me, bro.
Yeah.
And you've said enough to, again, leave enough room for speculation. And anyone listening, I always encourage people to do their own research. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to, any of that. I'm just here. Just make up your own assumptions, and I'm just presenting the information. What you do with that is up to you. And so I want to spend the last bit of the show talking about your new work that's going to be coming out here in April, and Etheric Magic, a complete system of elemental, celestial, and alchemical magic. Can you tell us a little bit about this work? What is Etheric Magic, and what all that consists of?
Sure. So yeah, that's coming out in April with Llewellyn, and essentially it's a distillation of it's I would say it's an introductory distillation, although I mean there are tons of exercises in this book. Like, you will be busy for a very long time with this book if you choose to actually, do the practicum. I wanted this, my last book, A Formless Fire, was more, I had appendixes in there where you could, do the LBRP, consecrate holy water, do a spagyric tincture, but nothing at this level of practice. That was much more of a history and theory book. And I never want to, right, going along with this whole theme of keeping things balanced, I never want to just release all this intellectual info dump stuff without having another book come right up behind it and do, okay, now here's the practical stuff. So that's what Etheric Magic really is. I do go into the history and theory of it, though. You have to know the theory. And the history is just very interesting. I'm using the term etheric basically as a Western term for chi, or for the energy bodies. Now, when I say energy, I don't mean energy in electricity or we don't know what this stuff is. And it's not imaginal because it's actually physical. It's you can see it, you can palpate it, you can feel it, you can move it. It's just some form of physicality which is extremely rarefied, and it resembles a fluid-like light. And you'll hear that talked about constantly, right? I talk about it in the book. Shamaim, the astral light, all this kind of stuff. It moves like water, and it is radiant like light. And I give many exercises to be able to teach people to see it and feel it and then move it. And those are just the preliminary exercises. Like I mentioned, I went to school for massage, body work, Eastern body work, and Chinese medicine, acupuncture. I trained in Qigong, I trained in Tai Chi, I trained in martial arts, I trained in Reiki. And all this was going on. I was also doing Western ceremonial magic. And I realized, wow, like these are two sides of one coin, truly. And we in the Western system, we completely gloss over it. Some people say like, oh yeah, well, it's hidden. Okay, well, why does it have to be hidden? Why do I have to read an alchemical text that's going to give me a seizure or a stroke, trying to figure this thing out? Who knows if the guy who wrote it knew what he was talking about? I'm not going to waste my time. So I really, really dove headfirst into the energy systems and the practices of the East because they're very, very well codified. They're very well kept. And it's part of a magical tradition. Benabel Wen, one of my favorite authors and practitioners of all time, that woman makes me look like a monkey. She is incredible. And she put together, she has a book called The Tao of Craft. And she talks about Taoist magical consecrations of sigils and talismans and the moving of chi. It's a very defined energy work sort of thing, right? Intelligent energy. And so I basically, over the course of 10 or 11 years now, I used the Kabbalistic tree of life as a kind of scaffolding and the symbol system of Western alchemy to basically create a system of energy work that does what we were talking about, spiritual alchemy, that does have applications to every kind of magic, including, if you're going to do it, conjuration. I don't recommend conjuring. You can use this for anything. And then also there is the health aspect of it, right? Because that should be a part of any practitioner's, regimen is energetic health. That's what Qigong is. That's the big secret. They transform Qi into Jing. They transform energy into essence. right? So they're taking prana and they're building with it more kundalini. And that's essentially what Qigong does. It's why they call it the fountain of life, or the fountain of youth, because they're transforming that energy into life essence. This is a big part of the Taoist adept and inner alchemical tradition, and I believe it is and was a big part of the Western tradition, but we lost it. So I'm bringing it back in this book and really giving the history theory and a crap ton of practice for anybody that wants to work this system, do the energy work, and then apply it magically.
The watery light, is that something similar to what the Gnostics talked about in the upper eons, that you were going to be, reunited with the source, and they described it as this watery light?
Absolutely. I would say that what it is that's the Shamaim up in those the fiery waters up there, and essentially it is the creative impetus behind everything. So there's this system, right? These words are muddled. Their definitions are not precise any longer when we say things like spirit and soul. But in the ancient system, particularly the Hellenistic system of the Greco-Egyptian Romans, you had psyche, soul, which was the aggregate totality of your experience of interiority. What do I mean by that? Your thoughts, feelings, emotions, everything that makes you inside your head, that experiential component, that was your soul, psyche. That's where we get psychology from. They thought it was, metaphysical. And I believe that there is a component that is metaphysical as well. Now, spirit was pneuma. Okay? And that actually is this sort of light-like substance. And for anything, even a soul, to enter into materiality, it had to be sort of vehiculized or enshrouded in this spirit. So spirit is literally the vessel of the body and the soul, right? Because matter has no life in and of itself. It needs pneuma and psyche. It needs spirit and soul in order to become animate. The word animate or animate comes from the Latin anima, soul. It's throughout the Platonic dialogues. Matter only has life when there is soul and spirit in it. And so that's what I'm talking about here. This ether is this spirit. It's also called the breath of God. And it is essentially the part of God that it is everywhere. In the Corpus Hermeticum, you have many things said about the one, the absolute, the monad, capital G God. But the one that sticks out the most to me is God is one and its substance is light. And you look at Masonry, you look at Golden Dawn, all this stuff. There is an intense preoccupation with light, further light, more light, light in extension, all of this light. It's a lot of people will say, well, because it's you can look at it platonically, where light is not just knowledge of things, but knowledge itself. And there's an interesting correlation to that with we were talking about before, nous, the intellect of God. Well, I was speaking with Professor Walter Hanegraaff at the University of Amsterdam, and he told me, he's like, yeah, that word gets translated as intellect, but what it really means is light. So it's really, really, really incredible is that it seems to be that whatever infinite mind is dreaming our reality, the basic substance it is using to create and move everything is light. And so that's why I hesitate to call it energy, because really it's this liquid light. It's this fluidic light that we're working with here. Now, the interesting thing is, again, that nous, intellect and light correspondence is it responds to our minds. There's a saying in Qigong, where the mind goes, the Qi flows. And so that's another thing that I take people through in the book, this preliminary exploration of, hey, you have an energy body. You have to link your conscious mind to it. And it's going to be like an arm you didn't know you have that now you have to like learn how to work the fingers and relearn how to use that thing. It is completely atrophied. And it's the same concept with your etheric bodies, is that you link your mind to it, and then it will do what you want it to do.
So many things are going through my mind, and I love Taoism. Taoism is very amazing, and there are a lot of interesting concepts within that, and what sprouted from that as well, right? Because there's this evolution, and you talked about taking various aspects of magical systems and kind of sort of merging it into your own. And I've always compared magic, or the current, right, this thing, to the Force, right, in Star Wars. And George O. Fucus, shout out to Slick Dissident, he came up with that one, of where you have the Jedi who use the Force, this thing, for good, and they good and evil subjective even in those terms, but they use it for positive, right, light, good. And then you have the Sith that use it for more nefarious purposes, how we were mentioning earlier, right, for corruption, manipulation, power, dominance over other people. And is that the correct analogy, that this magic, this thing, this etheric thing is like the Force, where you can tap into it using your own hardware, but as long as you know how to navigate your way around it, you're good? And that's why there have been multiple magical systems throughout all of history.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, well, first I would say this about the analogy. I like it because I'm a big fan of Star Wars, especially the original trilogy, but I would say that the idea of the Force was actually derived a la, Taoism, and, Joe Campbell, who influenced the series from the very beginning. It is derived from that principle of this unifying force that is all permeating. It's what we're talking about, the light. Now, and I remember what Yoda says too. He pinches Luke and he goes, "Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. Luminous beings. We are beings of light." That's what he's telling him. But your mind, Luke's mind, is so convinced that I am this guy in this place who can't lift the X-Wing out of the... And then he says, "I don't believe it." And Yoda says, "Well, that's why you fail. Because you can't wrap your mind around this shit." Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is another lesson of initiation, faith, right? Because people say, okay, if you're a Gnostic, you don't need faith. Yeah, but the thing is, in order to become a Gnostic, you need faith. Because you're not a Gnostic until you have knowledge.
You have to believe in it.
What's the motivation to work towards that path? Why am I going to climb the holy mountain if I don't have faith that something's going to reward me at the end? So there needs to be some kind of faith. But I would say that the good and evil and nefarious, they're tricky terms. You get a lot of people right now, especially all over the world, that think they're doing good, but they're really doing evil. Because they're so convinced, there's so much emotionality behind this idea of doing capital G good, that they don't realize they're subverting it. Their flame is ruddy. It's not a bright, pure, luminous flame. It's a flame that is giving off vicious heat and black smoke. And so it's not really this fire of nourishment. It's this fire of destruction is what they are manifesting, even though they think that they're doing good, right? Road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so I would say that in order to use something for the highest and best purpose, you are using the Force, the light, the ether for balance. Balance. That is what you want to do. You want to, and sometimes, to the uninitiated, it might look like you're doing something bad. It's kind of the same way in the prequels when Obi-Wan says, Anakin, you were supposed to bring balance to the Force. Well, maybe he did. Maybe there was too much light. He needed to bring the darkness to balance it. And what comes from that? Luke Skywalker. Mm-hmm. So it's really what we want to talk about is triangulation. You don't want to stay on the vertical or the horizontal axis of polarity, of bad and good, night and day. That's an unresolved duality. Now, a lot of people think you can take the poles and just push them together. Well, the poof, goodbye phenomenality. You can't have no experience that way. And other people kind of sit in the middle and kid themselves that they're, I have transcended duality. And what happens is you're still subject to the line of fire. Nothing here is static in this realm. You will find yourself moving very slowly to either side, imperceptibly so. And then from your position, you'll not really know if you're in the middle. So what needs to happen, and this is another initiatic technique, you'll see a lot of triangles, particularly in the Golden Dawn. You triangulate. You find a position which is center but above the line of verticality. And that is, once you're able to sort of walk that middle pillar and find the center point, you can rise above the situation and apply what needs to be applied. You get a bird's eye view, and then you work as an emissary of the divine by bringing balance to the situation however you can. And you don't just do that willy-nilly. So there's a tremendous onus and responsibility that you take on yourself. So you better be damn sure this needs to happen and that you're the one to do it. Now, on the other hand, I would say just because you can harness this energy and move it doesn't mean that you should be doing anything outside of your own practice with it. And I'll tell you why. When you become a magician, we call it sort of lighting up on the astral, but really what it's more like is you become a whirlpool that sucks all this energy in. And how fast and how powerful that draw is normally correspondent with how much you practice, how much inherent energy you kind of are a battery for, and also the moon cycles. The lunar cycles are very important. Now, the thing is, if you're really, really great at pulling this energy in, but let's say you've got no control over your libido, that energy is going to come through you, and instead of sublimating and radiating, you're going to ground it in an orgasm or some other destructive tendency. Now, orgasms aren't like of themselves destructive, but when you have that much energy and that little self-control, that's going to dominate your life. And that, again, in systems of traditional medicine, that will kill you. You will die early from wasting essence, wasting Jung, they call it. I'm not talking about, semen retention here, this new kind of weird reactionary thing that's going on. This is an old thing where ancient doctors would tell the emperor of China how many times a day he could orgasm if he wanted to have longevity, and it's still a thing in modern Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine. So there's things like that, other destructive behaviors, addictions, things like that, overeating is a way of kind of expressing that intensity of energy that is ultimately self-destructive. And so you need to have a really firm grasp on these things. And, people nowadays, they don't understand these concepts. So they think that all these ancient texts were talking about morality. They're not. They're talking about natural law. They're talking about cause and effect. And they're talking about, what that which is. This is what it is. And so now a lot of people balk at that. They have very reactive against that because of the social mores of our time. But I mean, the social mores of our time, they're kind of responsible for the time. We like to point back at this person and that person and this epoch. It's these guys. It's what we are doing right now, the way we are living and the way we are thinking and behaving towards ourselves and each other that keeps us in this crisis.
So reality is what I've called a cosmic cum shot. It really is all, it comes down to that, this concept. And I identify.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's how we came into existence. I think we're right, the seed of God, if you will, right? The Big Bang, if you will. I identify with Yoda when I'm a father. So when he dies after answering so many questions that Luke had for him, he's just like, okay, I'm done. He just dies. he just leaves. But one of the things that I've always speculated on that I know holds the secrets. And, you keep talking about the light. And in my opinion, the secrets are in the light. Now, in the manipulation of it. Now, I don't know if it's physical light, because then you can get into like, the cathedrals and like what they were doing, and were they invoking a spiritual experience while you were in there because of the manipulation. The Tiffany glass was made in a certain alchemical procedure. So, the way they made it, does that have an effect on it? Or was it more of like John Dee's catroptics, where, you have the stellar rays where your soul would become a mirror, right? And you can harness these rays that are constantly coming up and down from above. And then you have the whole stellar rays thing, where sacrifice plays a role into that, where you're able to snuff out that light, and then you take that and you can use it for something else in another operation. So, this plays a role into what we were talking about earlier about, the Illuminati. They're the illuminated, right? Did they know how to truly manipulate the light? And again, I don't know if it's the physical light that we see, or something beyond, or maybe a mixture of both, right? Because there is something to be said about let there be light. That's the whole thing.
Well, and the interesting thing here is twofold, because this is a very, very ancient idea. One of the reasons that we are preoccupied, particularly in Freemasonry, as I'm sure you're aware, with the solar allegory, right?
I don't know about that, actually. Can you enlighten us?
Masonry is preeminently a solar allegory. You have the worshipful master in the east, the junior warden in the south, the senior warden in the west. Nothing is in the north. Why? Because in the northern hemisphere, the sun moves through the southern skies. So it's the position, the triangulation of the officers in a Masonic lodge is the ecliptic. It's the apparent path of the sun in the sky. And this whole dying and rising kind of thing, again, is the sun dying in the west to be reborn in the east every day, and then to achieve its meridian height, its brightest in the midheaven. And this is the story of man, and this is the story of the soul, and this is the story of immortality and creation, because for some reason, this is the mental material that is creating the dream stuffs of God, the dream life of our Creator. And so Plato, actually, in the book 7 of the Republic, he talks about the allegory of the cave. It's very famous. Well, what does the prisoner who has been freed, what is the first thing that he encounters? The sun. But he talks about how that sun is just an image, an analog for what he calls the sun behind the sun, which is that it's the same principle of radiance and beneficence and life and light, right? They looked and they saw like, oh, things grow when there's light and heat on them. Oh, that's what we need for life, and for human beings to see. We need this kind of light. And so, but that, to Plato and to the Platonic traditions that influenced, the Platonic tradition influenced all the Hermetic stuff as well. People like to think that's exclusively Egyptian. There is not a single Hermetic text that predates the Platonic dialogues. It's Greco-Egyptian. He was using the same vernacular as Plato in the Hermetic dialogues. It was the same words, meaning the same terms. And so he talks about the sun behind the sun, which is a metaphysical principle of radiance and giving and light and moving outward from the center. And so it's kind of both. There's this tradition in Neoplatonism, late Platonism, that's a part of the theurgic practice of, I mentioned him before, Iamblichus. It's called photogagia. And it's the work of the luminous body, working on the ether to pure your etheric body. They called it the Avgoedes Soma, the luminous body, or they called it the Okima Pneumatikon, the spiritual chariot, right? Because in order for a soul to be brought into earth, it had to have a chariot. It had to be vehicularized. And so that chariot, that spiritual pneumatic energetic chariot, has to be strengthened, purified, rectified. And so this was done through lifestyle, through the pursuit of virtue, through specific dietary regimens, and also things like prayer and visions of the sun and being out before Helios and taking in the rays of Helios. And so, to these people, all of reality was symbolic of a metaphysical truth. So they didn't have to say, well, is it one or the other? It's both. Mm-hmm. It's both, because all of reality in its entirety is a symbol for the truth of God.
So the Son of God, I mean, we all think of it as like a son that you give birth to, but it's making me think of this, the sun, right? The one thing that is the life force of humanity. And I've heard the sun could be a portal as well. I've heard that souls can pass through it or come out of it, something or other, something like that. Might have been a little new agey where I heard it at, but right, the sun being a portal, and then you have the concept of the black sun as well, which is kind of sort of like this inversion of it, right? So that's something that I've always thought about, the secrets of light and what it means. And then all these guys like John Dee who were super into optics and all these concepts. One last question before we wrap up. So you have this book that has a lot of practices, and you wrote the first one as a more of the theory, and then now you have the practice, which is perfect, because in order to do something you need an instructional manual. But what are, other than aggravating existing conditions, what are some of the consequences of using magic, and what could go wrong? I think you mentioned a couple. You summoned something that you can't unsummon, that you maybe didn't learn its name, so therefore you don't know how the hell to call it away. But what are some other things that maybe people should watch out for if they are going to be dipping their toes into all of this stuff?
Balance is key, because magic will naturally throw you out of balance. So to undergo that sort of purificatory, quote unquote, sequence of spiritual alchemy is a preliminary. It's creating a safeguard so that you know yourself a little more, and you are more in touch with your energy bodies, your emotional life, your physical life, the realities of yourself. This is not a great time in the world for that kind of stuff. People will give a lot of lip service. They'll say a lot of platitudinous things about the shadow, but then you look, all anybody's doing is saying, you're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem. Well, take that ray and invert it. Turn it on yourself. What in me is making me a problem or making problems in my life? Because if you're not prepared for that, if you're not prepared by that, taking in this energy will inevitably destroy you. Levy said it. Blavatsky said it. The Magicians of the Golden Dawn warned about it. You can keep going back. You keep going back. Anybody there's always a warning that this stuff will kill you. Really, literally kill you, if not drive you completely insane. In some measure, and I've seen that happen as well. Now, the really interesting thing is this, right? So this idea of a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, it's not new, and it's not Christian only. This is a very old idea. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. They believed in something, the Hellenistic Greeks. They believed in the agathodaimon, the guide of good counsel, and the kakodaimon, the guide of bad counsel. And there were a lot of daimons that served to drag mortals down further into materiality and not let them rise in spiritual ascent. There was a theurgist in the 18th century. His name was Martino de Pasquale, and he founded something called the Eleucoans, the elect priests of the universe. It was sort of his idea of chivalric masonry, but he took it in a direction where they were summoning demons for the purposes of exorcism, literally trying to exorcise demons from the sphere of the earth. It was a very intense thing. It exists in the present day. Now, he wrote something called the Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings, or really it was put together after his death by some of his students from his notes and letters. Michael Osborne did a great translation of the treatise out of the original French. It's available on Rose Circle Books. I actually did the audio book. So for that. Now, Pasquale talks about how when the soul fell into humanity, it became what gets translated as a pensive being. And what he really said was that none of our thoughts are our own. And this is Pasquale, but it's resonant with this idea of the agatho diamond, the kako diamond. None of our thoughts are truly our own. The truest expression of a human soul is the action it takes, which voice it's heeding. Is it the agatho diamond we're listening to, or is it the kako diamond we're listening to? And the very interesting thing is that most of the time they sound like you. So if you're not prepared to become aware, to become sensitive to the inner realms, you will think you are having a thought. And this long this long game will be played. And you may not face the consequences on this side of the veil. I'd rather face them here than on the other side. So that's something that is very, very important. And then you have Zosimus, we mentioned him. He talks about something called the antimimon diamond, the mimicking diamond. And that diamond is one that is evil, wants to destroy you, but speaks to you as if it were good. And again, plays this long con. You see this a lot in like Celtic Irish, literally fairy tales, the tales of the Fae. Originally, nowadays we think of them as like these cute little, Tinkerbell things. These were horrifying beings that were involved in contractual relationships with humans that ultimately led them to their downfall. And so these things are out there, and if you're not trained, you will not be prepared to know what is going on. So it's very easy to like just take a person and destroy them if you're if you're somebody who is going to begin dipping their toes in the deep end here.
Either way, buy the book, but proceed with caution. Well,
I give you the cautions. I don't do anything that doesn't have some kind of guardrail, and that's thanks to the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn gets looked at as kind of like these magical germaphobes, but really what it is we are creating, as best as we can, laboratory-like experiments for magic, right? The same way you would create a sterile field to like do some sort of redoing that energetically.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed our conversation, man. All the things you say, you just make my mind just go off into places, and I'm trying to connect all the dots. And I really appreciate you joining me today and enlightening us on your work and the esoteric and the occult. I really appreciate it. Can you let the people know one more time where they can find you, your podcast, your work, all that good stuff, for those that didn't catch it at the beginning?
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been a privilege to talk. Though you called yourself an armchair occultist, you had several very insightful things to say, and the questions are just great. Sometimes, like, you don't, as a guest, I'm sure you know what you're walking into all the time. But this was great. And you do put on a great show, and it shows because you've got a following and people know you. So thanks for having me on. You can find me at ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER. The last thing that I want to plug is really important to me. This October 18th to the 26th, I'm going to be leading an excursion. It's a field immersive excursion in Egypt. And it's going to be in Upper and Lower Egypt. We're going over the course of 9 days to some of the most important and magnificent ancient temple sites, like the Osirion, the Temple of Osiris at Abydos, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Luxor, the Valley of the Kings and Queens, all over the place. It's going to be absolutely incredible. I'm going to teach hands-on a group of 16 participants the history, theory, and practice of Greco-Egyptian theurgic magic. It's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, probably because I won't do this again. It's just been very logistically heavy, but I can't wait to get back into Egypt. I've gone every year for 3 years now. But Yes, this is going to be absolutely incredible. Again, 16 participants. Registration is open until March 21st. For anybody that's interested, you can message me on my site, and there's more that Juan has here up on my website. You can check out the open house video that we did where I went through the entire itinerary and how I put these rituals back together, reconstructed them from ancient sources and stuff like that. We're going to have private access to these temples. So that is something that is extremely rare. And we'll also be staying, we'll have a 3-night stay to ourselves on 150 acres of Kings Island in the middle of the Nile River. So again, that's going to be in October of this year. Registration is open until March 21st. Reach out to me if you want more information.
Awesome. Yeah, you're not going to get that with a Graham Hancock tour for sure. He's not going to be teaching you the secrets of magic and all that stuff. So make sure to hit Ike up for that and check out his website, check out his work. And I appreciate your kind words, Ike. I am a student and I am just here to learn, have interesting conversations. So this is very fun for me and this is what I enjoy doing. So I appreciate that. And as always, everyone, make sure to follow the show on social media at the Juan on Juan Podcast, www.tjojp.com, Cultus Mundi, Homunculus Owner's Manual. Make sure to comment, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Let us know what you think down in the comments. Let's have a conversation. And as always, everyone, I'll catch you on the other side. Goodbye now.